Voice Teacher Podcast.
Hi, welcome to the Voice Teacher Podcast, sponsored by International Voice Teachers of Mix. I am Sam Johnson, and I'm joined with Amy Geddes, and we have been teaching for a while. Hi, Amy. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Sam?
Also, so good. So excited for today's conversation. Yesterday, you texted me and said that we're going to be doing vocal Mythbusters, which is just such a fun idea. What made you think about that concept?
Oh my goodness. Okay, I have this darling student. She comes in, she's about 15, okay? She's been a choral student for forever, like all through junior high. I'm helping her get ready for the high school auditions. They're doing kinesthesia and she's excited, and she's been working with this voice teacher for years, probably since 6th grade. And he is also her choir teacher at the junior high. And, we're working and she's like, yeah, I've never sung in my chest voice before. I'm like, what? And she's like, well, my choir teacher said that that's bad, like that you shouldn't ever sing in your chest voice because it will ruin your voice.
Uh-huh.
I was dying. I just kind of had to sit. I'm like, are you kidding?
Let's start with our first Mythbuster thing. So we have a lot of these. We're going to try to go fairly quick between all of these. If you have any ideas of big vocal myths that we haven't talked about, please chime off in the comments. We would love to hear if we missed anything, and then maybe we can do a part 2. Vocal myth number 1. Singing in chest voice will ruin your voice. It is just not true. I recently had a new student also who's a very, very lovely singer and has a bachelor's degree from a very well-known institution. And she also has been told by her teachers there, don't sing in your chest voice. They had someone come in and do like a new musical, and it was like obviously like a belty thing. And then the teacher was like, no, don't do it. It's going to ruin your voice. And I think we've had 3 or 4 lessons so far. And suddenly, like, her head voice is so much stronger since we started working on her chest voice. Amy, why is this myth busted?
You have to remember, what does chest voice even mean? If you ask a voice scientist, right, there's no such thing. All chest voice
what
means,
we're talking about.
right? It just means there's more cord closure. Like, you know what I mean? In its simplest terms, you're hitting those low notes fully connected. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
So what's wrong with that? It's interesting how it's like teachers will have one experience with one person. That person could have been extremely heavy and muscled down, probably dealing with muscle tension dysphonia, and assumed, oh, well, chest voice ruins your voice, not really understanding the difference. And then they assume that's how it is for everybody. Nobody should ever do this. Done.
Mm-hmm.
So, problem solved, except we've just created 10,000 new problems. So yeah, busted. No such thing. Like, I mean, really, there's no such thing as chest voice, right? If we really want to get deep into it.
Myth number 2, you have to sing from your diaphragm, not your throat. I think this is another one that is very sensation based. And now that we know a little bit more about anatomy and about physiology, it just doesn't work as well. To be fair, if you're feeling a ton of sensation in your throat, which I think a lot of people associate with like pulling chest or with a really retracted tongue, it's not great. But I don't know, what do you think even made this myth start?
Well, I think this is kind of what I see, is that oftentimes when you're singing something really big and full, and particularly like a belty piece, you may feel some engagement in your abdominal area. And I think people assume, oh, that means I've got to take a big breath and shove it up there and like shove that air at my vocal folds. And I remember a vocal scientist talking about how, if you think of singing from your diaphragm, the diaphragm is this, involuntary muscle. And I could be wrong on that. I totally make mistakes in my science all the time.
Well,
but from what I
something that we
understand,
can't actually feel. There are no nerve endings in the diaphragm, and it's involuntary in that we can't just like consciously flex it. but it is slightly controllable because we can control our breathing and we can also control other muscles around it. So it's this weird kind of gray area of, is it voluntary or isn't it?
Well, but the force that the diaphragm can create, I guess, is so many more times the force of the vocal folds, that what they can create is that you're automatically at an imbalance. So if you try to quote unquote sing from your diaphragm and you're taking these big breaths and you're basically going to overload your voice and blow the cords apart more than you're going to keep them connected. So vocal control or breath control, quote unquote, really should come at the vocal fold level instead of quote unquote the diaphragm, because I don't know. I mean, the diaphragm doesn't have any vocal folds in it, so I don't know how it makes sound. So I don't know how you could sing from the diaphragm. But people say that all the time. They come in, I know I need to sing from my diaphragm. I'm like, oh, that's really nice. Well, let's talk about some other things.
Yeah.
And I don't, deal with it then. But
I don't think it's worth like bringing up a lot in lessons. It's more just like trying to trick into different sensations or just, I've found actually that just thinking about the ribs not collapsing very quickly is a way better way to use these torso muscles than like thinking about pushing down. But again, if it's working for you, go for it. I think that a lot of this problem is just when we try to impose it on others and when people are learning how to sing, thinking that they have to feel this in a certain way or they're somehow doing it wrong. Is really tough. Vocal myth number 3, the diaphragm is near the belly button. It's not I guess it's kind of, but it's not. The diaphragm connects to your ribs. It's this big kind of pancake-like muscle, but it's what separates your lungs, your thoracic cavity up here from your guts. And it's
that's a lovely image. I like that. Like a pancake in the middle of your body above your guts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so when people have like some kind of hernias, it's when like their guts come up through the diaphragm and it's on the wrong side of everything. If you don't have a diaphragm, you're gonna die. If you're not using your diaphragm when you're breathing, you're dead. Like you're using it. I think that it is a fair thing to think, I'm going to let my air go really low and not let it be clavicular or just high chest breathing. But that's more about getting out of its way so that the diaphragm can move rather than moving the diaphragm. Anyway, that's not where the diaphragm is. Number 4, if you can sing classical music, you can sing anything. I think that a lot of classical music is really, really difficult to sing. And I think that going through the process of learning to sing classical music, you learn a lot of skills about how to learn things sometimes, but just assuming that doing that will allow you to sing any pop music, any rock music at a level that is professional and that sounds like those genres without spending extra time in those genres to become, professional. I think it's just complete baloney. Like if you hear a lot of people who have only sung classical music try singing in other genres, they sound just wrong. And it doesn't mean they can't learn how to do the other stuff. It just means that no, like there's another step in between, I think. My experience for learning to sing classical music myself was just that it was so much harder than a lot of the other stuff that I've done, that then going back to some other kinds of music, I'm like, oh wait, I don't need to musically, it's just not as challenging. Vocally though, like there's a lot that's absolutely as challenging.
It's like the difference between watercolor painting and oil painting. You have to use I don't know if you paint ever. I like to paint, but like oil paints, you have to mix with oils. You have to clean them differently. You have to do everything differently. You get an incredible painting and the hues you can work on it indefinitely almost. Like, I mean, an oil painting isn't necessarily done or dry like until you spray finisher on it. You can go back into that painting for a good 10 years even and still work the paints. I mean, that may not be totally accurate.
Like, Leonardo da Vinci was carrying around paintings for like 30 years just because, and as he would learn new things, he would just make little adjustments it's a cool medium.
But like a watercolor is so different. Like your paper can only handle so much before the integrity is compromised. You can only layer the colors so much until you get mud. Like and it's not as forgiving. It's not as redoable, So you kind of have to just start over again if your watercolor doesn't work. And I feel like opera versus pop, I don't even know which would be which, but just like the way you handle those are so different that if if you treat them exactly the same, if I go to like mix my watercolor with an oil medium, it's going to be a mess. I don't know, maybe it could be pretty cool, but you just have to use it differently, thin it out differently.
But there's
just
still
like the
some
voice.
stuff obviously in common between the two, and I think
Yes.
that's a pretty
Yes.
similar thing with this. Okay, where are
Yeah.
we at? 1, 2, 3,
Lemon
4,
juice.
5. Lemon juice is good for the voice.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I am the choir director for my church, my local group, and I actually absolutely love it. It is so fun. I love teaching the people in my church how to sing. Like it's seriously is the best opportunity because it's a chance to like make them sound good. But there is this sweet man who keeps lemon juice we practice in his home, in his space. And I remember he was like holding it up to me, like, anybody need some of this? Like going around squirting it. I'm like, oh, I think he really thinks that like you should take lemon juice before you sing. And I mean, there are so many things about that, right? Is lemon juice really bad for you? No. Is it really going to help your voice? Like from my understanding, it
Placebo
would.
is a pretty awesome thing, so it could. But
I mean, maybe if you have like a lot of phlegm, but you think about it, like your epiglottis is going to cover your vocal folds. So if you swallow lemon juice, it's just going to go right past it. I also had a student think that drinking olive oil, like a swig of olive oil,
would like
before.
lubricate things.
Yeah,
It's kind of like
maybe if you gargle it.
spraying some WD-40 on your knees.
Yeah.
Yeah, placebo is a very cool thing. When you swallow things, it doesn't go through your vocal folds. They're just different tubes. If you find that putting some lemon in your tea makes you feel like you're a better singer, go for it. There's nothing wrong with that, I think. And everyone is so personal that it's like some people can really get away with drinking chocolate milk right before they go to sing. Most people cannot, but you kind of have to explore and figure out what works for you. Number 6, only men have falsetto and only women have head voice. What's the difference between these?
Well, I would say falsetto is just, I mean, they resonate in the same space, but simply put, I would say falsetto is very disconnected, a much lighter connection than a head voice. A head voice would just be more connection up in those upper resonances. Is that similar to what you would say?
Pretty similar. I find that for a lot of people, they will say they feel very similar, like they feel them in a similar part of their body. Falsetto to me is a good way to just describe a sound quality. It's like it's usually a little breathier, it's usually pretty quiet, it's usually pretty high. And that's a thing that you can talk to a producer about and be like, oh yeah, I was looking for this more falsetto sound. But maybe as a singer, if you're not able to do it in that way, or if you maybe are just mixing so well and you don't want to go completely disconnected, then you can just say, oh, I'm just going to make a little bit more breathy or go into a slightly lighter mix. Only men have falsetto. Women can also make that kind of sound. I feel like pretty much most humans can make that kind of breathy sound, and only women have head voice. Pretty much every tenor, like if you're singing up above a G, you're going to be in head voice, unless you're just pulling chest like crazy. It's just, yeah, that's not true. That's not true.
Yeah, just not true.
7, I can't sing because I'm tone deaf. Have you ever met anyone who's tone deaf?
Oh gosh, I think we were talking about this a little while ago. I think in 19 years, I had one student at the beginning of my career, in the first couple of years, that I just could not hear it, like, at all. I've had people very pitch challenged. I have a couple that I work with currently that really struggle, but they're not totally tone deaf. They just can't get their body lined up. But yeah, and maybe I just was too young and inexperienced at the time to even know how to help that kid, And I had like 4 lessons with him. So Who knows? Maybe I've never really had anyone completely tone deaf, but I've had people who struggle for sure.
Yeah, most of the time people who cannot match pitch just haven't been taught how. If you hand me a violin, I'm not going to be able to match pitch very well. And
You could put stickers on it. They'll show your fingers where to go.
yeah, I might be able to figure it out over some time, but it's sure going to sound pretty terrible. Like there's going to be that learning curve. And I think a lot of people just don't really give themselves that time to learn it. And I mean, it's a little different than violin because most people who are trying to match pitch have spoken before and have used that instrument at some point in their life. And um, if you're talking and your voice goes up and down, you're probably not tone deaf because this is just if you talk like this all the time, you might be tone deaf because you might not be able to hear how normal people talk and how we use up and down motion and intonation to convey different emotions. At that point, I think that someone might be tone deaf or have a chance of it. But
That was awesome. But I even heard inflection in that. So I don't
yeah,
know.
it's I don't think it's there. Where are we at? Number 8, being nasal is bad. I think that a lot of times it's not the most desired sound, but again, this is another thing that is it nasality of coming in of like an M? That's a nasal sound. Or is it like a twangier kind of like, oh, I'm being nasal with this? Like, is this an appropriate sound for singing certain kinds of music? Absolutely. Is that going to hurt you? Probably not. There's a chance that you're getting that nasal sound by elevating your larynx, and that is harder to sing with. But what do you think about nasality?
Yeah, I think it's totally an aesthetic thing. Often I have to get people to be more nasal to get the freedom in their larynxes to activate because we got to take the pressure off of somewhere. And you're right. Like, yeah, getting that resonance right in your face, it's gold. Like you get so much bang for your buck when you're allowing that front resonance to happen. And I think if it's so bad that yes, your larynx is like squeezing and you just can't make it sound and it's like it sound bad. I mean, there's too far for sure. But I remember Dean that we had on in our last episode, he was teaching somebody, or I heard a lesson recording of his, and he was just talking about how really the only reason things get nasal is just because that's the pathway you've allowed, or like when you're talking French vowels, it's kind of and you've blocked off the sound to your mouth. Yeah, oh. And so if you want to get rid of that, really you just need to open your mouth so that the sound can go down there rather than have nowhere to go but your nose. And so I just kind of always think of that. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with being nasal. And I teach a lot of musical theater, so it's actually very desired most of the time and essential a lot of the
There's a
time. But
fine line. It's a really important sound to use. Okay, 9. You need perfect pitch to sing well. What's perfect pitch?
I wish I had it. That would be amazing.
I kind of don't wish. Like it seems like it's really annoying. There are some people that I've met who have perfect pitch and they whenever they're singing with other people, if they are not on the direct center of whatever their brain has tuned to probably A440, but maybe you've tuned to A444 and then everyone's just going to be singing just a little bit flat all the time. I think it's really restrictive for some people and also annoying to kind of be constantly saying like, oh, it's this pitch, it's this pitch, it's this pitch. I don't think it's necessary. Being able to sing in tune is a different thing than having perfect or absolute pitch. I do
Yes.
think it's important to work on relative pitch, which is the ability to hear different intervals and be able to jump between them accurately. And that is a skill that you can work on. But
Yeah.
a lot of people think like, okay, I'm developing perfect pitch. That's a really important thing. And I think that it's not. Number 10, oh, is the sound of an open throat, which is a very common thing in classical music for people to say, you have to open your throat. And then they'll make this sound. Oh, and this wonderful teacher, Kenneth Bozeman, who I hope will someday join us on the show, he, in one of his books, brought up the idea of false kinesthesia, which is your body saying that something feels different than it's actually being organized. So that sound specifically is if a lot of people make this sound, they'll be like, oh, it's a very open sound and it feels open.
That
That's
sounds really cool.
Well, it's just the sound of...
Sorry. I love it.
It's just
That
the
was
sound of
cool.
pulling your tongue back a lot. And so it's actually
Yeah.
the least open throated sound that you can get, versus E. E doesn't feel open. It probably doesn't feel like anything in the throat, but it's actually the most open pharyngeal position.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I was just, as you said that, because I didn't know you were going to talk about Ken, I actually had a few lessons with his wife, Joanne, and she taught me the exact same thing. It was all about, that blew my mind to be like, oh my gosh, that E is a lot more open than the And that makes total sense though, but you would never think that as a singer. That just is so, that idea of false kinesthesia, what you feel like is not actually what it sounds like. It's the same with labeling chest voice and head voice. What you think that is not, it's not really what's going on. That's why I tell people, and singing is overcoming the natural man, because the natural man wants to just screams and yells to survive. Hey, help, and you do this. But singing is such a higher art form. You have to understand what's actually going on, not just what you think is going on. And you have to rise above that natural instinct just to yell and to really turn it into art. So, but yeah, that's interesting. Obviously we both learn the same things from the Bozeman's, but they're amazing.
But it's
We should
really
have them on.
revolutionized my teaching, because
Yeah.
just teaching people that different sensation and remapping it's so powerful. And a lot of people have not been introduced to that. I mean, gosh, I was 10 years into my singing life before I was introduced to that idea, and then another few years before I really internalized it in a way that I was able to apply it for myself and for helping other people find it. And that's the fastest way to get a lot of people singing better. It's just remapping like that. Okay, 11. You have to squeeze harder the higher you go. Squeeze what harder?
Like that? Do you think that'd be good? I should do that.
Well, I've definitely heard the idea that as you go to higher notes, you have to squeeze a quarter between your butt cheeks, and that's going to help you get to the higher notes.
You should squeeze your diaphragm.
I find
too,
that anytime, you should squeeze your diaphragm. You should squeeze your abs. You should squeeze absolutely everything. Introducing unnecessary tension is not very helpful.
Really?
It's just
Why?
not very helpful. Because you don't sing with your butt.
Well, unless you're farting. I think Mark Baxter has a video on that about flatulence and the similarities between flatulence and
really?
singing. Yeah. And what's funny is I always think every time I go dry my hands in a public bathroom when they have those accelerator air dryers and I put my hands together and I just watch the skin flap. I'm like, oh, that's got to be what my vocal cords look like. Anyway, the things that entertain me. Woo. Yeah, you don't
12.
need to squeeze. You don't need to squeeze anything. Actually, I want you to not squeeze. Just relax.
We do not recommend squeezing unnecessarily while singing. It usually doesn't work out well. Number 12. Boys shouldn't train when their voice is changing.
I don't know. You're a guy, Sam. What do you think about that? What was your experience?
My experience was that before my voice change, I was able to sing really high and it was easy and I never had to think about singing. And then my voice changed and I tried to approach things the same way and it was not helpful. And then I went to Dean and Terry when I was 16, 17, and they just had to kind of pick up the pieces. And I just 3 or 4 years of me trying to figure it out on my own, I developed a lot of habits that I still deal with. And I think it would have been lovely for them to be actually, there's this other option, when I was trying to figure out, and I was miserable that I wasn't able to make the same sounds that I was used to making.
So are you saying you didn't train during your transition?
I did not. No, I didn't have, my first voice lesson was after my voice had pretty much gone through the main big drop.
Okay.
I wish that I had trained during my transition. I think that there's different expectations that we can ask from pubescent people of like, maybe you're not going to get the exact same sounds that you're used to. Maybe you're not going to get the same ones that you're going to get in another few years, but figuring out different ways to make sound that doesn't hurt you and that is leading toward good vocal habits is a really important thing. I think it's really useful to start voice lessons. Doesn't matter who you are, like around 12, just because everyone is going to start changing physically through that area. And even if it's not going to be perfect all the way through, I think people who go through that with that training don't regret it usually. Okay, 13. I can't sing high.
Well, yes, you can. You just haven't felt it before, so you don't know how.
Yeah, most people can sing high. They just haven't figured it out. 14. That only an hour per week session will make them great. If you're taking a voice lesson for an hour a week, like that's a lot of voice lessons. I only have a few people who I teach that much. And I think for like most adults, that's honestly overkill if you're not trying to be a professional. But if you're only singing in that 1 hour a week, you're not going to be singing enough to become great. Just straight up. You got to sing a little bit more than 1 hour a week to be really, really good at singing. 14. People expect that the powerful sound has to give a powerful feeling in their body. This is something that really, really messed with me because you hear a lot of like wonderful rock singers, pop singers singing high notes and really, really heavy. And it sounds awesome and it sounds so powerful. And then as someone who was squeezing a lot through my vocal transition, I felt like I would have to feel the same for singing high notes as I would for singing low notes. And that's something that I still am working through. Like I have to remind myself pretty much every day, no, it's not going to feel the same. And the first time that I figured out how to sing like a high C in a really full voice and I didn't feel anything in my chest, I was like, wait, I know I've been telling people this for a long time, but it's actually true. Like you won't, because I thought that mix, okay, so it's a mix of head voice and chest voice, therefore I'm going to have to feel something in my chest. And when that wasn't the case, it just blew my mind. Yeah, singing high notes in full voice doesn't necessarily mean that you will feel them the same way that you would feel speaking in chest voice. 16, altos don't have high notes. What's an alto? First off, like alto is a part in a choir. Alto isn't a voice type. And they do have high notes. Sometimes it's just that most alto lines in choirs are just like this. Just a lot of D's and C's, so they don't really go that high a lot of times. I think that in choirs, especially in in most non-professional and non-auditioned choirs, people who sing alto are not the people whose voice type fits most closely to that range, but they are the people who can hear a harmony. Most people who sing soprano in those choirs are not people who are natural sopranos. They are people who need to sing the melody a lot of times. And that's totally fine. Some of the best trained singers that I've heard who are like really low voices, they can sing just as high as pretty much anyone else. It's just they sound different when they do it. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people run into problems with is this idea that voice typing is just range based. It's simply
quality
not.
based.
It's
timbre.
It's quality based. Yeah, because it comes from Western classical music of like, you're this kind of voice. Okay, I know the exact roles that you are going to be able to play, and it saves some time with that. But as soon as other normal people kind of get a hold of that, it becomes a limiting factor saying, I'm an alto, therefore I can't sing high notes. And it's that restriction in your mind that's making you not be able to sing the high notes, not your body most of the time.
Okay.
Thank you for this wonderful idea. That was fun. Do you have any last thoughts?
Oh my goodness. I think as teachers, you just got to keep singing. Don't forget to keep singing yourself. And hey, if it works for you, like a lot of these things I think come out of personal discovery, like what you notice when you're singing. So if you're not taking time to practice yourself and make make some discoveries that you can share with your students, however you term them. Just make sure your students know that this is your idea of it and not this is how it is,
Yeah.
like this is how I'm describing it because this is what works for me. And I think if you just go with that, you're good. Like you're doing good, teachers. You get out there and you help people sing, right? That's what we want.
I think that's something I saw in common with a lot of these is just people expecting their experience to be the exact same as someone else's and teaching that your experience needs to be the exact same as someone else's. And if it's not, you're doing it wrong. Therefore, people learning how to sing are chasing the experience that someone else had rather than just like putting a label on whatever their own experience is. And that's the thing that I think that having a really good voice teacher is useful for, is just calling you out when they're doing something good and then saying, put your own label on it. Here are some other labels that some other people have used. What's your experience like? And giving the power to the individual, because there is so much wrong with voice teaching culture. And I think a big part of it is this idea that like there's just these masters that know everything and we have to be these serfs bowing down to them and making ourselves do things the exact same. And it's just demoralizing, and it takes away any sort of individuality of a voice and of an experience, and of like, we're all different people. Why we cannot expect it to be the same. And that's what I saw with like all of this is just, yeah, maybe it worked for someone, whatever. Yeah. Cool. It's not real. It's like Dean said in the last episode, squeeze that lemon. Might work for one person, but yeah. Squeeze that lemon juice into your mouth and then drink it, and then you'll be a better singer.
Yeah.
Brought to you by Tom. Thank you for listening. Oh, no. Now let's listen to Maz sign us off. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Voice Teacher Podcast, brought to you by IFTOM, International Voice Teachers of Mix. Your co-hosts are Sam Johnson and Amy Geddes. Learn more about IFTOM at iftom.org and find Sam Johnson at vocalese.net and Amy Geddes at breakthrough-studios.com. Voiceover and theme song by Maz Mazak, and this podcast is edited by Amber. You have been listening to the Voice Teacher Podcast.